Etherpad. 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 Should we use the Etherpad?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not sure.
I like your kid little face. That's like a proof check. You can work together.
He's already seen this. Ben? I was wondering, are you sitting on the JavaScript chair?
No, come on.
All right, let's see.
Were you asking me to sit in the JavaScript?
Well, if you can. That was great. Thanks.
You also want the JavaScript?
Sir?
You also want the JavaScript?
I'll keep that in mind. Okay, what? Yeah, sorry about the screen quality.
It's like track 5425 for this.
Let's exactly. Okay, so welcome everyone to the ICE working group session here at IETF 97. And yes, sorry about the projector quality. It seems we didn't do much about that right now. And since this is an IETF meeting, the note well applies. If you're not familiar with it, please go check it out. Blue sheets going on over there, please sign them. And thanks guys for volunteering to do chapter scribing and note taking. And when you speak, as always, please use the microphone and state your name before speaking. On agenda today, we are now doing the introduction and status update. After that, we have a short slot for Trickle ICE, figuring out are we now done with it. This used to be, the agenda was slightly modified this morning because it seems that we are pretty well advanced on Trickle ICE. So we hopefully don't need much discussion on that. Follow Trickle ICE will have a Krista presenting the conclusion on the TA discussion of ICE-BIS, so that transaction pacing discussion that we had after our last meeting with the transport guys. Then we have a short slot on ICE and multipath opportunities by Paul Eric. And then at the end of the meeting, we're supposed to, well, going to have a fairly long slot to discuss what should we do when we are now done, almost done with the current working group items. And if we have time in the end, there's also a slot for clarifications on ICE-BIS. So these are not major technical issues, more on the side of editorial things. So that's why we have the slot in the end. If we have time in the end of the session, Krista will be asking for feedback on some of those too.
Some of them are.
Okay, some of them a bit more technical than the others. Okay, any questions or comments on the agenda? Okay, I see none. So we go to Trickle work group status. So dual stack fairness draft, the IESG review was completed just a day ago. However, now we're doing a new IETF last call because in the previous IETF last call, there was unfortunately wrong information in the ID tracker on the status of the intended status of the draft. So draft is supposed to be informational. There will be a new last call started on that. But after that is done, we assume it's going to be going to the RFC editor. ICE-BIS getting ready for last call, and we updated the milestones on our documents. And ICE-BIS, the new milestone is on December this year. And on Trickle ICE, also getting ready for the last call, and the update milestone for that is on January next year. Okay, then Trickle ICE Status. So there was a new version submitted after the Berlin IETF, which addressed most of the issues that were discussed at Berlin. After that, we got a whole bunch of good reviews from a lot of people. Thanks a lot for that. It's going to make our life in the last call much easier. And the current plan for Trickle ICE is to address the remaining comments from Berlin and also from additional reviews, submit new draft towards the end of the month, and start a work group last call. So now would be a good time if you have something in your mind that you think we still have an open issue, technical open issue on Trickle ICE that we haven't solved. Now would be time to raise it. But if you think we're all done, then I hope we'll be seeing last call any day now. Christer?
Christer, so when was the latest version? Because there was a lot of comments, mostly editorial,
yes,
from me and others regarding usage of, SDPs and offer answers and all this stuff, which really doesn't belong in this draft.
Those are not yet addressed in the version that we have in the tracker.
Okay, so there needs to be a new version before.
Yes, there will be a new version, hopefully end of the month.
Okay.
That was the feedback we got from the authors. Okay, but if there are any open issues you have in mind, please raise them right now. Okay, if none come to your mind right now, Christer, please.
Thanks. Yeah, this is going to be quickly. One of the things we thought we had solved in Berlin, but turned out that we haven't, was this TA issue, how we're going to calculate that one. The action point from Berlin was that some people, mostly they were Cullen, I think Peter, you were involved, and Justin, maybe others, they were going to discuss with the transport people about this. And there was a pretty long email discussion about this, and I also want to thank everyone who participated in that one. And there was a conclusion coming out of it. So there was a pull request created, and it was merged, and the change has been implemented in the latest version of the BIS draft. There was no objection to this. Currently there is an open pull request because there are some changes which are needed to do in the Appendix B. Very minor. It's just a couple of places, I think, where it says that the lower bound is 20 milliseconds, but that should be 5 because that's the agreement that we came to. I'm not going to read the text. I'm just going to show you the highlights about how you now calculate the TA value. Basically, first of all, the default value is 50 milliseconds, but you may use another value based on whatever network characteristics. And then, which is really the new stuff, is this so-called this global thing. For example, if you have a parser with multiple, if you have a browser with multiple tabs, to make sure that you take all those into consideration. When you calculate the TA values, you're not going to have many of them with the same low value, which is going to cause problem. So the so-called global TA value. And then in addition, there's some text explaining why this new minimum value of 5 milliseconds, which I see there now is misspelled up there. Maybe it's also in the draft. I have to check that because I copy-pasted the text. But anyway, I'll check that. But anyway, there's some text explaining why for in this case 5 milliseconds was okay, but for transport protocols in general, it's not okay. So, but you can read that in the draft. I don't have it here, and that was it.
Okay, so for everyone, this has been the open issue since, well, pretty much as long as we've been doing ICE in the ICE working group. So are we now all happy with the final conclusion? 5 milliseconds seems to be safe also regarding our transport folks.
If you know Redis, it's in. Oh no, I don't have this section number there, but I think it's 11.2 or something. But you'll find it.
Yes. So are we happy now? Any final concerns, or we're going to go forward with this? Yes, I would be more than happy to go forward, but just want to make sure we don't get any surprises. Okay,
I think
see.
it was mainly Cullen who had issues with this, but as far as I understand, he's happy with it. So
Yeah, I think so. Hi, I'm Paul Eric. I think I'm happy with it. Did some simple tests with the cheapest NATs I could buy from Home Depot or equivalent, and I was not able to crash them with anything. I don't know, whatever older equipment would struggle, but new one seems up to speed with this.
Okay, so I think we are so far so good with TA. I see some nodding in the room. Excellent. That was quick and easy. So, Paul Eric. We are well on schedule.
So these are some initial thoughts on what we could do next when Trickle ICE and whatnot is finished. So one of the things I like to look at is moving from this static concept we have with ICE today to more dynamic, changing media paths. So the options we have today by influencing the network is RSVP, which is pretty much dead in the water. Doesn't really work. We have ECN today to get some feedback from the network at least, but at least for UDP, it has its own problems. We're not sure whether the network would mark UDP packets right. And DSCP seems to have its own set of issues, but at least in the confined realms of the network, where it's supposed to work, it actually seems to work. So that's a good thing. If you look at the client options, you could rate adapt, which most clients hopefully do. And we have ICE, where you can check the connectivity of all available paths, like all the physical ones and various ports and protocols. We recently had some issues by choosing the wrong port for sending media, more explicitly the traceroute port 3343, which seems to be heavily rate limited in some ISPs and not others. So it took a while before we actually managed to figure out it was actually that port that caused us problems. So the end goal is to find a combination of all physical and virtual network paths like IP4, IP6, and the transport protocol, UDP, TCP, TLS, and ports that actually have connectivity, and make sure that we choose the best one, not based on priority, but on actual measurements. So what building blocks do we have? Well, we have multipath RTP, which can set up multiple paths. I'm not sure whether you can have TCP and UDP in multipath RTP. Anybody knows? Yeah, it's only for UDP. But that's fixable. And of course, we have ICE, where you check all the connectivity stuff, and then you build a valid list, and then you choose one candidate pair for communication. So like combining those two might be a good idea, because then you could build a nice setup and you can just switch between paths without restarting ICE. Not looking at the sort of, maybe, like if you could kind of take the valid list and have more than one nomination, I guess you could kind of use that with multipath RTP.
Yeah, Jonathan Lennox. First to answer that, there's a lot of stuff in RTP that sort of implicitly, assumes a single path. Like all the there's only a single feedback. Oh, from ICE perspective, it's kind of an assumption that you're going to converge on one. The other thing I would put as sort of as a possible thing in the building blocks is that given that we're doing SCTP for all the data channel stuff, I think, and SCTP does multipath, but nobody's using it. I think that might be another thing to put into your building blocks bucket.
That's true. And maybe quick, whatever. Well, create nice transitions. No need to switch media addresses if it detects a better path and stuff like that. So. And why? Looking at UDP and TCP, it's always interesting to see how ISPs sometimes rate limit UDP. So, like, if this is the UDP traffic through an ISP, sometimes when they have a DOS attack, they start to cut traffic, and obviously your ICE session would suffer, and maybe it gets even worse when Quick gets deployed. I don't know. That's just an assumption. So being able for ICE to switch between UDP and TCP and stuff like that might also be a good idea. And why? Yeah, sure. Input is good.
I mean, I'm coming back, Christer. I'm coming back to my earlier question, and this is something actually we did. We've had some discussions when we did SCTP over DTLS draft. We discussed the same thing. I've discussed the same thing with the BFCP people for their ICE consideration. And for example, it's going to come up, I think, in music when we talk about ICE, the SIP SDP, about switching a candidate, because my understanding is that you can have multiple connections, whether you need to always renominate them, but you can have them, and if you're using, for example, continuous this refreshness, you're gonna keep them all alive using that one. But then one of the things we say, for example, is that, or we assume you can switch from one to another, because what we are gonna suggest that's added text is that if you switch from UDP to TCP or from TCP to UDP, that you don't need to send an updated offer. You can just do it. I mean, if you have those candidate pairs in the valid list, you can just switch between them. Today already, there's nothing new needed for that.
Well, you still need to kind of keep the valid list valid and stuff like that, but it's
Peter Thatcher, Google. So at some point you're probably going to have a slide that says what do people think? Was that the last slide?
Yeah, it's this one.
Okay, is that now, or should I?
Yeah.
Okay. So it seems like you have well, there are two ideas inside of this. One is that the ICE agent would keep multiple candidate pairs alive, and I think that's a good idea. That's similar to what I was proposing with the renomination draft. And then the other is that you would not only keep them alive, but you would actually send media on more than one at a time. And if like you're suggesting, you're going to do any form of multipath, either multipath RTP or multipath Quick or multipath SCTP on top of ICE, then ICE would have to have a way of allowing multiple network paths to send media at the same time. So I guess the question would be, like Christer was saying, is there anything we need to add to ICE to actually make that possible, or is it already just kind of baked in? And I don't know. I can't really think of anything any reason you can't do this already.
That's my assumption, so if I'm wrong, please tell me.
Because you can already keep multiple paths alive. You just need a way to renominate, which was what I proposed. But I guess you would need a multi-path renomination, maybe. But I don't.
Yeah, nominating more than one candidate pair is probably what's missing, but that's not huge.
Right, Jörg. You sounded a bit. So I agree with Peter and with Christer. You sounded a bit like it would be a job of ICE to make decisions on which ones to pick or how to monitor, and that I wouldn't be super happy with. So I think that's up to the transport that runs on top of ice to figure out which of the path you want to know. An interesting question is whether there's any kind of sensible API one would need to do to come up with in order to allow path changes, upcoming things, and so forth to be then also conveyed.
Yeah, I agree. It would be nice if ICE presented all the.
It's like, so here I tried these 20, and here's the 3 that work now, and oh, by the way, two have come up and 1 has disappeared, and but that should be Boolean in the sense of saying it works or it doesn't work. It shouldn't be any kind of quality assumption on how well that would work. I think that's something you would want to have a layer above.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a problem we have with ICE today. Is the priority of the candidates, I think, because it says how to create the checklist and how to do the checks, and it also tells you what to pick, sort of.
I thought the priority was only for ordering, but I mean, it gives you suggestions. But if you would if you would give multiple, then the app could still figure out what the priorities it would want to use.
But I agree. It's up to the application to choose which path. And it's maybe ICE's job to just present a list of the paths. I don't know.
Jonathan Lennox, sort of responding to Peter. I think, in terms of, do we have the mechanisms, the ICE plus renomination to do this? Probably, but I think you still need negotiations that, yes, this really is what I'm doing, as opposed to I'm doing ICE plus renomination, but only expect media on a single connection at a time. And then I think there's probably going to need to be a lot of work at, I think, I'm not sure like multipath RTP is as fully baked as we would like, so probably need to be a lot of work at that level, but that's not this working group's problem.
So I guess the question is that something we should care about making sure ICE-BIS works with, or is this something we should wait until ICE-BIS is finished and then?
Kirsten, no, I was thinking, I don't remember now what ICE-BIS says, so maybe ICE-BIS says that you must pick one, but this was more something that was for the ICE-SIP work. But of course, if it's not allowed in ICE-BIS to begin with, then we don't need to worry about it in the music either. So.
Jonathan, yeah, my inclination would be to say, don't keep shoveling new features into ICE-BIS. Let's get ICE-BIS done with the existing feature set, and this will be an extension. It's I think our extension story is pretty solid, so I think let's not put this as, don't keep adding features to an existing release. Release and then release the next thing later.
So if anybody has any ideas, please come and talk to us, and maybe you can write up a draft or anything like that, instead of just having a presentation.
Okay, thank you, Paul Eric. So this whole discussion does relate to the next point we have on the agenda. It's like, what do we want to do in the future with the ICE working group? Is it something along these lines, or something else? Do we want to call it a day? So if there are no more comments on this topic, okay, Paul Eric, do you want to? You already addressed these points.
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
Peter? Oh, there.
All right. There are 2 paths on the road. Which one shall we take? You get to choose which one goes with which picture, or road in the picture. So 2 options we have are, A, we continue working on extensions to ICE. Our charter currently says without major changes. Or B, we say ICE is done, and anything that we would want to do in the future would involve major changes, and so we would need to at least do a recharter. Those are the 2 roads. Discuss. comments?
Jonathan Lennox. I mean, I don't, favor major changes just like for the sake of major changes. I mean, I would want to see, an individual submission proposal for, this is how we think ICE should be completely rewritten. And I guess there have been some in the past, but I'm not sure how much people believe in the things they've done so far still and things like that. So, I mean, I'm open to it. If somebody says, here's my new design, let's, given our experience, redo it from scratch. But I'm not going to say, sure, I don't care what they are, they're just as long as they're major changes.
So maybe I should have given a little context. It wasn't Berlin, it was the one before that. I proposed a few minor changes, and a lot of people at the microphone said, yeah, this is nice, but what we really need are some major changes. We could go check the minutes. But it was kind of 50-50 at the mic. It was like people in favor of minor, people in favor of major. So that's still the decision we have. Oops. Is Lennox the only one with an opinion? Because if so, we'll just let him decide.
Well, I just said I don't know yet. I want to see what you're proposing.
Ted Hardy. I kind of agree with Jonathan. Putting a charter in front of the IETF community that says, we're going to change this to say, make ICE more flexible, robust, and more suitable for changing environments and allow major changes, you then have to have some milestones that listed what those major changes were and what they were going to do for the community. And so in the absence of a concrete proposal that would fit into that kind of structure of giving you a new milestone to shoot for, I would say you keep the current charter, continue to make the incremental improvements that are in mind for right now, and then if somebody comes forward with a proposal that you want to take up and the consensus is that it's a major change, you recharter at that point with that as the milestone associated with it, rather than making this general adjustment.
Okay, so let me see if I understood correctly. The right IETF process in this situation is to propose something outside the charter in this group, but then that would be like a possible topic of recharter when we say, okay, this is something specific we can't do here, but we would right now, but we would recharter, but we do it here.
So Ted Hardy, there's always more than one way to do it within the IETF process, and you could take it to dispatch, and dispatch could tell you to go over here because there's already a working group, or you could do a whole bunch of other things. But that certainly works within the IETF process as I understand it. And so that is a way to do it that's certainly well understood.
Okay, that's good feedback, thanks.
Sorry, my comments resolved to basically +1 at this point.
Okay, so I think we have come up with option C, which is propose stuff here and see what comes up as proposals.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's just sort of to maybe phrase that a little more positively. I think previously we've been focusing on getting ICE-BIS related things done, so we've sort of been saying things that are not directly in the charter, sort of not getting a lot of time. I think we're now moving towards let's give meeting time and list time to new innovative work so we can discuss it.
Right. And more specifically, if we don't get any concrete proposals, we won't be setting any agenda time, and there won't be a meeting.
Ben Campbell. So I'll preface this with, I'm saying this without really knowing what the concrete proposals are likely to be. As it was just mentioned, we have both the ability to bring things here to the working group or to take things to dispatch. What I would suggest is if these are things that are very self-contained in ICE, it makes perfect sense to do it here. But ICE is a protocol that's used by a bunch of other stuff. And if we're talking about things that have significant material interactions beyond just what goes on in this room, then it would make sense to go to dispatch with it.
Okay, so if your proposal is, this is the current ICE. If you're proposing this, then come here. If you're proposing this, then go to dispatch. Anyone else?
Okay, seems we don't have anyone in the room out of the people who have been proposing earlier major changes. So maybe the need has gone away, and that's completely okay. I mean, I think it's a success to say, okay, we're done, and we can close the group. That's not a failure. That's a success, and it's a good thing to do. So we shouldn't be inventing new work. Definitely, don't get it that way. What we want to do now, figure out, is there someone who has a substantial drive to do new stuff that's within the charter of the current group that we should be doing? If not, let's declare success and be done with it. As an option C, maybe.
Oh, that would be D.
Or D.
Or maybe that was that was B.
One of the letters. Okay. So at least in this room we don't have no one in the chapter or Meetico saying we should be doing something. Yeah. Well, we still have our milestones to finish, so we're not done this year anyway. But hopefully by next meeting, maybe we can declare success. Okay, well, that gives us a good amount of time to discuss some ICE details. This is the session you've all been waiting for. Krister.
Yeah, it says here clarifications. There are a few technical things here which is coming up also. Originally, I didn't have too much time for this, and when you see some of the things I'm going to present here, you're probably wondering, why am I wasting everyone's time here? You know, showing this. Why don't I just do a pull request or you know, suggest a fix on the list and you know, we're done? And we don't really, I mean, no, we have time, but I mean, my intention wasn't really to go in and start discussing all this issue. Well, the thing I want to get out of it is that, in my opinion, there are still some editorial work that we need to do in the draft. It is difficult to read, and that's not only my opinion. There's been some people who are new to ICE who have read it, and you know, please read it and see what you think. And it's a complex document to read. The intention is also not to when I wrote these things, my idea is not to rewrite the whole, you know, spec to make it more readable. I think these are things, fairly small things that can be done, you know, replacing some words, removing some sentence, adding some sentence, and those kind of things to make the spec more readable, actually, before we publish it. But like I said, there is also some technical issues. One which we also already discussed in Berlin, which was raised by Emil. Unfortunately, he's not there. I don't know if he's on the. Yeah, he's not there either. So, but anyway, so we'll come to that. But to show what I mean, this is something. This is actually what someone said in Berlin when we discussed Emil's issue. And I don't remember who it was, but you know, I think this it's not, you know, it's maybe a little overrated, but I think it you know, shows that it is difficult to understand some of the parts, and I think it's more. I think the discussions we've had is very much related to what I call checklist interactions. For example, when you do checks in one checklist, how does it interact with other checklists? When are you going to unfreeze candidates in other checklists, and which ones, and so on? So that's coming up here later also. This is something which came up on the list a while ago. It pretty much died out because the guy said that, you know, they have implemented wrong. But I mean, I'm not sure. But the issue is here that today, when we do pruning, the text says that we basically do this so-called base replacement, where we, you know, put the base in the local, only applies to server reflexive candidates, assuming that because you're never gonna send anything from the server reflexive from the local candidate, so that's why we prune those. But the thing which came up on the list was that, or the question was that, doesn't this also apply to peer reflexive candidates? And obviously, when you have your initial checklist, you're not going to have any pair reflexive candidates because they will come later once you start doing the checks. But what the spec also says is that when you do find these pair reflexive candidates, you can update the checklist and add them there and send the new one to the remote endpoint, using SDP or whatever. And I assume that you're going to prune that checklist also. I don't know if the draft explicitly says that, but I assume you're going to do it because doing it because you're going to have your server reflexive candidates and everything in there, so you will prune it again. So the idea here was that shouldn't we also then prune these pair reflexive candidates? And there are basically two ways we could do this. And first is that just add to the explicit text which talks about server reflexive candidates, we also add the pair reflexive ones. The second one, and this is one of the things I talked about earlier, this may seem like an easy fix, but we need to make sure it doesn't have any side effects, is that we have a more generic statement saying that you always replace the local by the base. I mean, in some cases they are going to be identical to begin with, but I mean that's fair enough. But if we always replace it.
Jonathan, isn't this just editorial? Because server reflexive and peer reflexive are the only ones where the base is not equal to the candidate. Because for host and relay, they're equal.
Yeah.
So how are these two statements effectively different other than editorial? How you present it editorially, I agree, is important because the document's confusing, but I don't think it's the technical decision.
I talked with Ari about this, and he mentioned that, or he asked me that I should look into the TCP draft and look at this, what do they call the NAT assisted candidates. And I did that, but I don't think it would, because my understanding is that even when you use NAT assisted candidates, the local candidate is going to point to the whatever the NAT gives you, but the base is still going to be your local your device, and that's from where you're gonna send the
okay, yeah, I mean, okay, I hadn't thought about the TCP cases. So I mean, it sounds like probably describing it in terms of two, like for UDP they're identical, this is editorial, but I agree that I think two probably makes sense if there's extensions in the future, though you don't know. I mean, I think even for TCP you don't signal them as NAT assisted, right? You still will have to use one of these four names.
I don't remember that, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and also a lot of these things in general that Chris is now presenting has a bit of an editorial nature, but the thing is there because the spec is relatively complicated. We don't want to do big editorial changes without checking with a wider group of people. Is this the right thing to do? Because it's easy to miss some corner case that only those two people are aware, and those two people actually change who they are. So depending on the part of the ICE. So that the whole idea of this set is to have you guys think about this, think about your own implementation, your own way how you did it. Does this conflict with the idea you have in your head about ICE? So regarding this, so both are fine.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion would be that we move ahead with alternative 2, but I make a pull request so before people don't have to try to read this in their head, and people can look at it before we submit a new version. I mean, it's a very simple change editorial wise. It's just in one place in the document where we have, so it's not going to be a big change. It's so from that perspective, it's easy. And related to this, I didn't do a slide on that, but related to this is that I also plan to align terminology about base, because sometimes the documents say base, sometimes it says base candidate, which was a little confusing, I think. So I'm probably going to use base, or I think candidate base is better, but I'm going to align that terminology anyways.
So Cullen, sort of switching topics here. I'm very sympathetic to how much we tell you to do one thing, then we yank it to somebody else editorial and keep moving things back. And I apologize in advance for all of that. But I mean, it seems like we have much more important things to be discussing here, like congestion control, that we don't really have one that works. I mean, we're going to get to that type of stuff. This is editorial.
So congestion control, as in not in the context of IceBiz, but as in a new document.
As in IceBiz.
As in IceBiz. So we had a Oh yeah, you were not there in the TA discussion. We had that already.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. I'll go over the minutes.
We can
okay.
actually we can revisit that part.
I don't want to create work for you. I'm not trying to. I wasn't asking that. I just I just wanted to make sure that we had covered the really important issues before we got to the editorial issues. And it sounds like we have. So I will just sit down. Thank you.
Although in the TA discussion, let's say we didn't have everyone in the room yet, so maybe we want to revisit after this again. But anyway, let's.
Okay.
I think this will be good.
Let's go.
And as I also said, I guess before you came in here, is that my intention was really not to spend a lot of this face-to-face time with these issues. I mean, I will do pull requests and so on, but I just want to make people aware of it, that there's still some work we have to do before we publish it. But I think the idea is that we move forward with alternative 2. We take a look, I send an email on the list, and people like Emil and those can also look at. Bernard, I guess it's not here, but yeah.
So me to go.
Yeah. Well, I send it to the list and yeah. Then there was this Emil Shisha. I'm not going to re-bring that up here. But basically what he says that there are cases where you're going to unfreeze the whole checklist. You have a frozen checklist, and there are cases where you're going to unfreeze the whole checklist. I think there was already in Berlin someone who gave a comment that he couldn't find anything in the specs saying that. Emil said that, yeah, there is definitely is text, and I guess, okay. I couldn't find it either, the text there. There is some text, and I'm going to come back to that actually later, where you will unfreeze for each foundation 1 pair in the checklist. So maybe that was what Emil was thinking about. So we see about that. He was actually going. He had this table which he used, which was, I think, very useful, which he used to demonstrate this problem. The idea was also to create a pull request to get this into the spec. He unfortunately didn't have time to do that. I didn't have time to talk about. I sent him an email about this issue, and I thought, "Are you sure you're right?" He didn't reply. We are going to have a phone meeting after IETF, and if we still think this is a big issue and we need to discuss it, in the working group, we're gonna talk with the chairs about having a phone conference. But we'll see what happens. So I'm not gonna say more about that here now. But one of the comments which was given by Peter when we discussed this is that there could be cases where you would never unfreeze certain candidate pairs, and of course, whatever changes we need to do. That we need to make sure that doesn't happen. I don't think that will happen either, based on what I read, and I sent you an email about that. But anyway, so we need to figure that out. Then there are a few aggressive. When we did the removal of the aggressive nomination, we did have a pull request and we removed the text. But then I think Bernard found out that there is still some text that needs to be modified or removed because of this. He has done a pull request. You have the link there if you're going. I encourage you to go and have a look at it. I think he sent a link also on the mailing list. It's not in the draft yet, but unless there are any major issues, it's going to be in the next version. This is something else which came up on the list, and I'm going to present it in a little different ways. As you know, we have we have all these states, and then we have checklists can be 2 types. It can be active when at least one of the candidate pair is in the waiting state, and frozen if all the candidate pairs are frozen. But then this question is like, okay, but what if no candidate is in the waiting state, but one or more candidates are in the in progress state? So my assumption is that we are active then also. But again, this is a question I got from someone who weren't familiar with ICE, and I think this is something I think we should fix. It's a small editorial check. That was another thing, and this is the thing that came up on a list. Do we need to talk about these list types to begin with? I mean, can't we say a list where the pairs are frozen, or a list where one or more pairs aren't frozen? I don't know, but those kind of things. It's a little when you read this, because you have all this. You have the states, you have the candidate pair states, you have the checklist state, you have the ICE session state, then you have these types of checklists, and then you have these queues, the triggered check queue, and I mean it's kind of messy. But that's really not. This was more just about this definition of the assuming we're gonna keep the active checklist, that it should also cover when a candidate pair is in progress.
Jonathan, I mean, I guess the thing is, where are these states used? I mean, where in the document does it just say, if it's in this state, do this, if it's in that state, do that? That's the thing to look at to see what happens, figure out what should happen if, there's in progress but nothing is waiting, or everything's completed or failed, or so on and so forth. What is,
Yeah, I mean,
and like I said, and if there isn't anywhere where this is used, then you should remove it. It's the, it's the dead code elimination and all that. But, and if it is used, that should hopefully tell us.
I think it is in use because you have, for example, when you have some race conditions, then you take this in progress in consideration. I don't remember. So my suggestion is not really to remove any states here. I mean, no,
I'm just saying I don't know what the answer. I mean, I think probably if there's in progress but not waiting, but if it's if where this is used is, do you pull one off to start it? Then obviously, if you don't have anything waiting, it's not relevant. If it's something else, then that's why I need to review this back, or hopefully have you review this back and tell me to say where this is used to figure out what the right answer is.
And a similar question I got is, why do we need this valid list? Why don't we just define a new candidate pair state which is valid, and then but again, maybe that's a little more than what we want to do at this stage. So that's why I didn't add it to the slides. Then we have this sending from local candidate versus sending from base. There are some few places in the document which talks about you send the stun request or the connectivity check from the local candidate. But as far as specification is concerned, you don't do it. You always send it from the base. And again, in many cases, they're going to be the same, right? So, but that that's not the point. The point is that if you look at the definitions of what local candidate and what base means, you're always going to send the connectivity checks from the base. So the suggestion basically would be here is that we do that modification also. It's not in too many places in the document, so I guess this would not be a big rewrite. So, but check that, or I mean. Because the only thing the local candidate is going to be used for is when the other one sends stuff to you. So, right. So, but your checks are always sent from the base. Okay, and then there's another thing. The BIS draft. This is when you start unfreezing one of the checklists. It says uncheck the first media stream, but there is no guidance. Okay, what does first media stream mean? Does it need to have some specific characteristics? Is it the most what is it? I mean, and now when someone can say, yeah, it's the first M line in the SDP, but keep in mind this is not SDP. So for example, in the music spec, we may say that when you use this with SDP, then first media stream means the first M line in the SDP. But I think we should say something here. If we don't say anything else, we should at least say that the meaning of first media stream or the selection of first media stream is outside the scope of this document and need to be defined by each usage of ICE. But the way it's written now, it's completely unclear.
John, thanks. Yeah, I agree that it's the ordering. I mean, not just which one is first, but the total ordering, because there's a lot of things where it's not just the first one, but the next one is also used in a number of places. And I think that has to be defined by the using spec to sort of what is the order, the total order of the media streams.
And I was thinking, for example, when I talk about these characteristics, I guess in most cases, if you have multiple streams, in a normal case, you're going to have the equal amount of candidates for each of them.
Yeah.
But in theory, you could have, let's say that you have some kind of media stream that you, for whatever reason, you always want to send it through a turn server.
Yeah.
So you're not going to collect other candidates for it.
Yeah, well, this is
just let me finish this. I have it in my head. But then for your other media streams, you can have all these host, local, or whatever. So I thought that first media stream, the characteristic should probably be a media stream where you have a large set of candidates. You don't think so?
Jonathan Lennox. I mean, I think the problem is that the case you're describing is a subset of some of the more complicated cases, because there's also the case like the pure distributed media case, where the foundations on stream 1 and the foundations on stream 2 are entirely disjoint.
Yeah.
Because they're actually two different boxes that you're controlling, which we have to handle. And I think this gets into the EMIL table issue, where it's like it's the first stream that has this foundation that caught that, and then things like that. And it's possibly the whole description of the algorithm needs to be, I think I think I pointed this out to JDR late in the development of 5245, and I think there's some text in there which is kind of flaky about that. So we might want to even make sure that we actually have this algorithm well specified. So it's like the thing you want, you start checks start. The first media stream that has this foundation. I'm not going to wordsmith at the mic, but basically that's what starts out as unfrozen. The first check with of this foundation or something. I mean, hopefully you understand what I mean. This is the EMIL table, but this is the area where we need to make sure that this is right for these like distributed media cases, or like you said, one legal system going through turn, or one media stream, the turn server failed, so you don't have a turn candidate for that stream or something like that. There's a bunch of cases like this, and it also interacts with a lot of the trickle cases.
Yeah. So maybe maybe in 4.5.4 we don't need to go into much in detail of that, but I think at least we should say that there must be a mechanism for usage to define what is the first media stream. Or something. I don't. Well, as far as 5.2.4.5 bis is concerned, only the first one matters, because then when you find when a check succeeds, you're gonna go through all your other checklists and see if you have matching foundation in those. There is no text about saying then you go to the second checklist and then you go to the third.
Yeah, but there's the issue that I think I was just mentioning. That is again the distributed media case, where if a certain foundation only appears in the second one, it's like in the second and the third, then you start that check on the second. So you need to know which one is second. You need to have a total order so that you can find which is the first one for each foundation.
I hear what you're saying, but that's not how it's defined today. Everything starts from the first media stream, and then you have the rest.
I think that might be a bug in 5245.
Well, yeah, okay.
And that's not how I implemented it.
So
I wanted to work the way I implemented
okay,
it.
so have a look at that. But
okay, Jonathan, do we have you as a volunteer to make a pull request on clarifying text?
Oh, maybe.
I don't think this is little more than a pull request or clarify.
Yeah, I think this would be something that actually requires.
Because this is more. This is more.
Yeah, maybe I think this is related to the EMIL table issue and things. So maybe I need to, discuss it on the list.
Okay, so let's figure out the call on that. Jonathan, Emil, Krister.
Okay.
Sometime soon after this meeting. Excellent. So can we have notes? Note takers take that note of.
Yeah, and then this is just a small check, but again, a question I got is the order of connectivity checks in the definition for waiting. The definition waiting for says is that check has not been performed for this pair, and then it can be formed as soon as it is the highest priority waiting pair on the checklist. But that's not really true, because you're always gonna send trigger checks first, no matter what the priority is. At least I couldn't find any text saying that when you have a trigger, when you trigger checks, suddenly you raise the priority. I mean, the priority has been calculated before a pair is added to the trigger queue. So I think
are trigger checks put on the checklist at all? I thought they were sent immediately.
Trigger checks go to trigger check queue.
Which is not the same thing as the checklist.
They are in the checklist.
Are they in the?
Yeah.
Highest priority waiting. No, did they go to waiting state? I don't think. Hold on. Trigger checks don't go to waiting state, do they? They just send immediately. Yeah, they're just sent immediately. So
No, they are not sent immediately. They are, and that's under text. They are going to this triggered queue, and they are sent at the next possible. Wow.
Oh, but his point is that if the triggered queue is non-empty, then even though something is the highest priority waiting card on the checklist, it still can't be performed immediately, I think is the argument. So the wording there is not quite right. That's what he's claiming, which I guess I kind of see.
Yeah, and I mean, my point is that I don't really think in the definition for waiting, we don't really need to say when something is going to be sent. I mean, I don't think so. I think basically, I think we could remove this and just say that that a check has not been performed for this, but is ready to be performed when applied. It's some word. But my point is, we don't really need to talk about this because this belongs elsewhere.
Yeah, so that, can be performed when the state machine will allow.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, to make sure that this is now in a state where it's going to be sent or checked. Yeah. And related to that is that in the same sections, the definition for frozen says that a check for this pair hasn't been performed, and it can't be performed, and then you have involved until some other check succeeds. But pairs can actually be unfrozen also due to other reasons. It's not always when something succeeds. For example, if the timer expires and there are no pairs in the waiting state, then you are going to start unfreezing the frozen ones. But that's done because of that, not because of another check being done. But again, I'm not sure whether we need to really specify here, when and if they're going to be unfrozen. The important thing here is that saying that they are frozen and they will not be checked until they are unfrozen due to the procedures in this spec, something like that. Unfreezing of checklist, and this is maybe a little related. I don't think this is the EMIL'S issue. This is another issue. For example, you have text saying that once all pairs in a checklist are either in failed or succeeded state, which means you have tested them all, that the other checklists are unfrozen. And that's a little strange for me, because say that you have one checklist where it's done, but then you have another checklist which you are still working on. So why should you then just go and unfreeze everything else? I mean, you should work with that one and test those things, and you go on and go on. I think you shouldn't really, when the only thing you have left is unfrozen checklists, when you don't have anything else that's going to trigger any text, then you start unfreezing them if you still have them. And I guess this could happen if in this, that we talked about earlier. But I don't think just because one checklist is done, you should go and unfreeze everything else. I don't think that's and yeah. So my suggestion would I don't have this. I need to think a little how to word it. But the idea here is basically that you don't automatically unfreeze other checklists until you don't have anything else to do. Okay. So that was it. So again, there is some editorial-ish work still to be done. Like I said, I had many slides, but the changes required for each issue is not that big, I think. But I think it will make the draft much more readable. So that's why I really want to do it before we publish. And if people still think it's not readable after that, then at least we tried.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Actually, that was the last thing we had on the agenda. But I suggest we visit the TA discussion now when we have Cullen in the room. Let me pull up those slides.
Thanks. Really sorry I wasn't here earlier. I just couldn't be here.
No,
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was saying, so what I was saying is that there was this discussion with the transport people. You were involved in that. And there was a pull request which was merged and is now in the latest version of the BIS draft. There is currently a pull request to align Appendix B, a very small change. Then I said, here, this is basically what the change is. And I see there is actually an error. It says 50 milliseconds. There, it should be 5 milliseconds. And that actually bug exists in the draft also. I checked that. So it was not my. But basically what it says here is that the TA value is 5 milliseconds, but you can use other values. Then it talks about this global TA value to take that into consideration. And then there is some text talking about why 5 milliseconds is good for ICE, but it's not good for transport protocol in general. So
I was worried more about the congestion control issue. So we had this thread with the transport people talking about not more than 10 outstanding packets, unreplied packets, and fuck, there's the person to speak to it right there.
Okay, so if you go read the whole list or 2 or 3 or however many there were, you'll see that the pattern was basically that they had a set of 3 rules, the transport guys that they wanted. And in the case of ICE, those basically reduced down to 1 rule. And the 1 rule was that there had to be a global TA of 5 milliseconds.
That's interesting. I mean, the math I saw was 500 milliseconds RTT unless you knew otherwise, and not more than 10 outstanding packets, which would imply a TA of 100 milliseconds, not 5 milliseconds.
Yeah, so later down in the discussion, they said, well, actually, instead of 10, it can be 100. And at that point, 5 milliseconds was the bottleneck, not the number of outstanding. Go read the whole thing. I mean, it's a long email discussion, but you can read all of it.
The problem is due to the way the people use the email addresses and how IETF works, I don't get many of the emails from the people that were on it. So that's not my fault. I can't read much of it.
You can also go read see what it says, and there's some explanation. The whole thing is explained in the pull request, the reasoning.
What max bandwidth do we end up on that then?
The same one you would get with the rules that they proposed.
What is it? Do you know?
It was. I'd have to do the math. It was in the ballpark of what we were saying.
Okay.
So I don't want to say a number. It's it's the kind of number that we were proposing earlier to be the max rate.
Okay. And we're comfortable that like the 80s, like ISG is going to be on board with this 100 outstanding unrequested packets.
Well, all the experts in the area of congestion control were, so.
Okay. Yeah, no, they will be if that's okay. So I mean,
Okay, so
I'm shocked and would not be surprised to see this back here again on the, it didn't turn out to be quite that, but that's wonderful if it's all resolved.
yeah, I guess this is the best we got so far.
Colin Perkins. So I don't recall the outcome of the discussion, but if it really is 100, I would suggest that someone checks with one of the transport guys to double check that.
That was from the transport guys.
Yeah. So as I say,
Okay, specifically.
As I say, I don't recall the outcome of that discussion, but if it really is 100 packets outstanding, I think you should check with someone from the transport to make sure that there hasn't been something lost in translation.
Again, you can go check the email thread, but I mean, I was very clear saying, okay, this is what you want, and then wrote the pull request with all the explanation. They proofread the pull request. They specified here are the IETF RFCs that we need to reference and everything. So David Black and John.
Colin Perkins. So I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I believe you did all of those things, but as a transport person myself, I'm not someone who's commented on this. I suspect if you go to the transport and say it's 100 packets outstanding without any feedback, you'll get a whoa, really? So as I say, I would recommend, and if you don't, that's entirely up to you, but I would recommend you double check with the transport ADs.
Oh, well, I don't know who the transport ADs are, but.
Yeah, Alyssa Cooper, I don't. So, yeah, I mean, you can send it to TSVR, but I really feel that it's unfair to you to be badgered about what you did because you did exactly the right thing. And there's a long thread about this on the ICE mailing list that includes a lot of input from Jenna and David Black, which were the instigators of this originally. So I think you did a good job with this.
just one more thing. The backup plan is basically to, you know, if somebody says, you know, we can't go forward with just rule 3 out of the 3 because it reduced down to the 3rd, we could just back up and expand it back to the 3 rules. And the 3 rules are still basically in there, but they're as part of an explanation. And if it can't, the worst case scenario is that we take the reduced rule and expand it back to the 3 rules and make it normative instead of explanatory. But it doesn't seem like that's necessary. So
I just want to say I didn't want to come across wrong. Thank you for driving that into the ground. I'm not, you know, not easy. So thanks.
This is Ben Campbell. One comment on the history of how we got here. Yeah, I realize that there's always a concern that the TSV ADs may surprise us, but we got here by going to the TSV ADs, and they sent us to these people to talk about it. So if we come back to the TSV ADs, we're just going through the circle.
Okay, so seems we have been turning enough stones on this topic for now at least, so we are confident going forward, and no one is anymore disagreeing on that. I think that's a good thing.
I mean, you still have time to change your mind. I mean, you know, I'm just talking about experience from Bundle. So.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Christer. And I think unless anyone has any other issues you want to raise up, I think we have a chance to close the meeting before end of schedule, first time in the history of ICE working group. I think that's also great. Okay, I don't see anyone coming to the mic, so in that case, thank you guys, and have everyone sign the blue sheets. If not, please sign them, and see you around.
that's a good point. Now just let it slide out quietly.
Yeah, we don't have any elections.
You want to talk now? I mean, we probably want to discuss it.
I was a little surprised at that first myself. And they typically think of packages. In our case, but that explanation. So if somebody did ICE that was the reason they gave it. And like, to be perfectly clear, we were going forward with the rule sets again. And David Black thought, well, you can make this bigger. And I was like, well, then you get two rules.
Maybe you're right.
Like I said, with the worst case scenario, having to back out.